Hello, it's Mr. Nobody. I'm coming at you with another book review. So today I'm going to talk about Camille Paglia. She's a very interesting person. If you get a chance to, definitely look her up online because she is one of the most entertaining and hilarious people you could ever listen to. She gestures with her hands more than any person I've ever seen. This is not an exaggeration. She literally talks like this, and she talks so fast, and she's so passionate, and the things she's saying, she's so unrestrained. It's just wonderful to listen to her. They're criminals. They're crazy. She is just the most hilariously entertaining person. Her mind is full of so many things, going so many different directions. She's this wonderful Italian lady. I just kind of adore her personally. She's someone who, as soon as I saw her, I just fell in love with her and was like, wow, you are such a hilariously brilliant and interesting and entertaining person. And the first thing I want to talk about is, she has this wonderful book, Glittering Images. It's a journey through art from Egypt to Star Wars. Now, even if you're not super interested in art, this is an interesting book if you wanted to just get a taste of, the intellectual professional's approach to art, but not just some stuck-up idiot. I having spent a lot of time around academic people, I've never had a lot of patience for people who create a work of art that took 5 minutes, and then really it's all just contained in how cool they think they are and their explanations, which last for 20 hours. And so that kind of conceptual art where they couldn't be bothered to actually develop any craft. I personally despise that kind of thing. I'm the sort of person who, if it was up to me, the entire Tate Modern would probably be bulldozed. I have very critical opinions of a lot of modern art. I found it very vacuous. Now, the interesting thing is, if you're someone who kind of feels that way, but also wants to understand art, Camille Paglia is the person for you, because by the end of the book, she basically says, classical art is dead. It is functionally dead. It has become a masturbatory, self-reflective exercise in self-congratulation. And in her opinion, art died and became pop culture. And so that's why Star Wars is at the end, because she basically says Star Wars is the last great work of art that our culture has produced, which is very interesting. But it's great because she does help you actually look at a lot of ancient art, and she does start with Egypt. And I actually really enjoyed having a chance to look in detail at images like this and really explore them through the eyes of a professional and someone who's really deeply researched them and deeply thought about them. And so it did help me think more about a lot of these basic art objects, including some very old ones. So I actually really recommend this. If you have to pick one book about art, it's great. It'll give you a greater appreciation of art. This is an amazing statue with an astounding story too. If you get a chance to learn about it, so I would highly recommend this book. I have to confess I'm something of a classicist, so of course once you start getting to people like Picasso, I don't have the same appreciation, and I don't necessarily see all the same things that she sees. I'm finding less and less in the works, but she knows all the history and all the things connected to it. And if you want to at least have a window into understanding it, if you're curious about it, it's worth a read. And it's very good for the earlier chapters, especially if you're like me, more of a classicist, and want to learn to take a detailed eye to the art of other cultures and see how you can learn about it from them. And especially, this is the thesis, the glittering images. She uses that phrase because for her, art is it's the lifeblood of a culture. It's telling you what's alive in the culture. What are the ideas that are powering it? What are the ideas that are changing it? What is it that is underlying the idea of the people that is carrying it through its period in history? What is inspiring it? What stories are speaking to it? What peoples, what archetypes. And if you have any interest in a Jungian approach to art, I think this is a good book to sort of give you that sort of approach, because she sees it as connected to deep human psychological needs, deep civilizational needs, and how those are expressed through works of art, how we tell the story of who we are and what we care about and where we're going. And that is why so much of modern art becomes a little vacuous for her, because it's no longer really actually telling the culture about itself or where it's going. It's become mere criticism and deconstruction. It's no longer actually building anything. It doesn't have ideas of its own. It's living off of scholarship and criticism of previous cultures. And that's why she places Star Wars up there, because she says Star Wars actually represents a late attempt to take the stories and mythologies that have powered a culture and inspired people, and hold up a vision of who we are, who we have been, who we want to be, and what our values are, and actually articulates it in a way that the culture embraces, and feeds off of. And so it's very interesting in that respect. And it's fun, and it's an easy book. I just read this book on a plane. Didn't even take very long. If you get a chance, you should pick it up if you have one tabletop book on art. That'd be a great one to have. Now, this book is her like giant life's work, scholarly work. Sexual Personae, Art and Decadence, from Nefertiti to Emily Dickinson. Now, this book is exhaustive. This book is gigantic. It's 700 pages. This is a truly serious book. Now, I greatly understand, of course, the desire to basically put her entire perspective and her entire sort of lifetime scholarly work into one single volume. That's actually a pretty good accomplishment. This is something I actually emailed her about, but it is just a lot, and it's intimidating. And she informed me that, well, actually, you can just buy the introduction as its own separate book, and it basically covers almost everything she has to say. And you don't have to actually go through literally the entire history of all art, one by one. You can just sort of read the conclusions and the theory. And in fact, if I had to give any recommendation, it would be take her recommendation. Just read the introduction and you will get the whole idea. If I had to sort of summarize what this book is, it's a theory of art and Western culture, particularly Western culture. She starts very far back. She starts mostly with Egypt as the genesis, and then moves through, like it says, all the way from Nefertiti to Emily Dickinson. And so it's saying, what is Western art? What is its relationship to the culture? How did it develop? And it is a comprehensive, massive answering of that question, which is a very interesting question to ask. Now, if you don't like hearing people talk about sex, then you probably shouldn't read this book, because to her, sex and sexual behavior and sexual personae sit at the bottom of a lot of culture and a lot of elements of culture, and it's very much Jungian in many ways. It would say she'd probably say the fundamental conceptual categories for thinking about ourselves and thinking about the world, thinking about art, thinking about civilization, thinking about values, thinking about so many things, come down to these deep down, deepest archetypes and categories, which for her are sexual. They have to do with men. They have to do with women. It has to do with the relations between them. It has to do with all the different directions they can go and how we define it. So her way of looking at history and culture is very much centered around sex. Not necessarily the act of sex, but actually the being of sex. What are we? So it's very interesting in that respect. But if you aren't someone who wants to hear an awful lot about sexual imagery, then this is not the book for you. Partly because sexual imagery has been such a big feature of art. It contains immense and intense symbolism. It's something that carries very large symbolic meaning for us and has been used in so many cultures, so many works of art, and she really digs into that. And occasionally, because that's what she spends so much time doing, I feel like she overstates it, the significance of some things, but I mean, that's bound to happen. This is one of the more interesting books I've ever read. It will open your brain up. Don't go completely crazy with it, but if you want to really open your brain up to a different and interesting way of looking at the world, this is the book to do it for. This really really makes you think about, what does sex actually mean for us? How deep is it to the way we think? How deep is it to the way that we create? How fundamental is it? And answers that question with, it's enormously deep. It's the deepest thing. It's the thing that goes back the farthest. And, if you talk to evolutionary biologists, they will tell you things like, well, how deep and significant and how much things are built on something, the reality of something, in some ways can be measured by how far back does it go. And you'd say, well, how far back does sex go? And the answer is, well, as far back as everything except internal to the cell specialization into organelles. So basically, about as far back as it is possible to go, and be any kind of even slightly complex life. And so this is the cultural version of that, of just saying sex sits at the bottom of culture, in many ways. In prurient ways and not prurient ways. It just informs how we think. It informs how we communicate. It informs our ability to express ourselves and what we think about who we are and the world that we live in. So if you've ever been someone who was curious about a subject like gender studies, and you actually wanted a good take on it, and the sort of work that they do, this is like the good version of that. This if you want someone who genuinely has an appreciation for both sexes, for what they've contributed, for the way that they've interacted, for the way that they've struggled with each other, for the way they've defined one another, for the way that they've interacted and cooperated and created the world that we live in, particularly through the lens of art. Camille Paglia is one of the best people you could go to. She articulates a vision for understanding sex and gender and culture and art that is unique and brilliant and also just fascinating. And reading it definitely, at least for me, puts me into a strange, transcendental, trance-like state. It sort of opens, it's a good book for actually opening you up to art and opening you up to these deep categories. And without sounding too kooky, it's almost a sort of shamanistic experience, by which I mean you're meditating and thinking about these deep things like art and sex and identity, these currents that have run through our entire civilization. And she just helps you to get pulled into the flow of it, and the richness of it and the colors of it, and it wraps you around and carries you away. And so it's a fascinating book to read. I would give it, I can't give it an unqualified recommendation because it's just too long. But if you just want to read the introduction and you're curious, it'll at least expand your mind. I can't say what other people who aren't me will think of this book. I found it completely fascinating. It could make other people be lost in the miasma of the colors and curtains of the past, and it might be too crazy for some people. And some people might run with it in all sorts of crazy directions. But if you have a decent tolerance for someone talking about pornography and pedophilia and all sorts of things very, very straightforwardly, and just saying, what can I learn about the culture from this? Because she's one of those very open people who's like, I just want to see everything. And I remember her telling a story of going to an art exhibit that had such shocking and horrific images. She said she was almost physically sick watching it. But she's the sort of person who still wants to go see it because she just finds it fascinating. She would say, maybe you shouldn't show that to the general culture. Maybe you shouldn't actually project that where children can see it, because I, as a professional, can hardly stand to look at it. But she, as a professional, is completely fascinated. She wants to see all the craziest things that people have ever done just so she can understand. Um, and if you don't want to actually go look at all that stuff, but you want to hear from someone who has, and hear some intelligent and thoughtful thoughts about it, this is the person to do it with, and this is a good book to do it with. If you don't have the patience for that, listen to some of her YouTube lectures. She's an entertaining person, although you may have a harder time finding YouTube lectures about art. You're more likely to find her talking about feminism and other subjects, her criticisms of the modern academic world, which she's extremely critical of. And a lot of that comes out of the fact she's a true 60s radical. She's a radical. She wants freedom to look at everything and try everything. But she's someone who keeps her head and just wants to study it and understand it. And not everyone can do that, but it's amazing that she's someone who can. So if you have a chance, definitely check out that book. Thanks. That's all for today.